I have carried the keys to every door in this fortress for 6 years, which means I know 2 things better than anyone alive: where every lock is, and how little it matters to hold a key when no one will open their ears. I am Tilda. I was 24 that spring, a woman grown by any law you like, and a maid by every law that counted in the king's hall, which is to say I was furniture that walked. I lit the lamps and snuffed them. I aired the rooms no one used. I carried the great ring of iron keys at my hip, and it sang when I walked, and not one person in that fortress had ever once turned at the sound of it to see who was coming. That is the gift of being a maid. You are everywhere, and you are no one, and you hear everything. I heard the plot on a Tuesday, snuffing the lamps in the East Passage. I want to be honest about my choices here, because someone always asks. A maid survives by being unseen. The safe thing the thing 6 years had taught me in my bones was to finish the lamps, go to bed, and let the powerful murder one another the way the powerful do. No one would ever have known I heard. I chose otherwise. I want that on the record. Whatever happened after, it happened because I decided a king's life was worth more than my own comfortable invisibility, and I have never once regretted the decision, only the 7 times I had to make it. 7, I counted. The first time, I told the captain of the night watch, a decent man named Gunnar, with a beard like a thorn bush and no patience for maids. He heard me out, I will give him that, and then he asked me, not unkindly, whether I had been at the cooking wine. The lamps make the passages warm, he said. Sound carries strangely. Go to bed, girl. The second time, I told the steward of the kitchens, who told me to mind my pots. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th times blur together. Because they were the same. A closed door, a busy man, a maid with keys at her hip, and a warning in her mouth, and the small specific humiliation of being thanked for my concern. I have been thanked for my concern more times than I have been paid, and it costs the thanker exactly nothing, which is how you can tell it for what it is. The 6th time I told Lord Roderick, the master of the king's household, because I had run out of lesser men to disbelieve me. Roderick was the calm at the centre of the fortress, the king's own sworn shield since they were boys, keeper of the household, the man who knew where everything was, and who everyone trusted to know it. He had a way of listening that made you feel heard, right up until the moment you realised you had been managed. He listened to my whole account, the 2 voices in the East Passage, the word poison, the word feast, the name I had put to one of them, and then he folded his hands and told me, gently, that he would look into it personally. He did look into it. That was the trouble. I just did not understand yet what looking into it meant, when the man doing the looking was the man you should have been looking at. The 7th time, I told the king, I had no business near him. A maid does not approach the wolf throne. But the wolf made my business for me, and that is where this story actually turns, so let me back up and tell it properly. The king's wolf had been behaving strangely around me for a month before any of this, and I had told no one. Because who would I tell? And what would I say the king's wolf keeps bringing me things? Because it did. It started with a glove. I found one of the king's hunting gloves on my pallet in the maid's quarters, fine grey leather, unmistakably his, and I nearly fainted. Because a maid found with the king's belongings is a maid who hangs. I returned it to the kennels in a panic. 3 days later, the wolf brought it back. To me, it walked the length of the lower corridor with the king's glove in its mouth, past warriors who froze against the walls, and laid it at my feet in the scullery, as though completing a transaction we had agreed upon. Then it was a boot. Then, God help me, it was the king's own seal ring, which I wrapped in a rag and delivered to Gunnar with my heart in my throat, swearing I had not stolen it. And Gunnar looked from the ring to me to the wolf, sitting in the doorway, with its tongue out and its tail sweeping the floor, and he said a word I will not repeat in front of an audience. The king, I would learn, found this development unbearable. Magnus of the Iron Reach did not lose control of anything, least of all his own wolf, and his own wolf was conducting a one-animal courtship of a scullery maid in front of his entire court. He was, by every account, mortified. He was also, and this is the part the court could not forgive, entirely unable to stop it. So when I came to the great hall, on the 7th day, with my warning, the wolf was already there. And the wolf was already mine, and that changed what a maid was allowed to do. I will tell you what the king looked like the first time he truly looked at me, but not yet. The first time he looked at me, he did not see me at all. He saw a maid making a scene, and his face closed like a door I did not have the key to. "My king," I said, and the hall went quiet the way a hall does when something improper is happening. "There is a plot against your life. At the feast. I have heard it spoken, twice, and I have told 6 men, and I am telling you because the 6 men did not listen, and I have run out of men." A laugh went around the hall. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. Indulgent, Roderick rose from the king's right hand, smooth as oil on water. "My king, I have looked into the maid's claim myself. It is a misheard conversation in a warm passage. The household is secure. I would stake my life on it." He smiled at me, and it was a kind smile, and that was the most frightening thing about it. I understand the girl means well. The king looked at Roderick, his oldest friend, his sworn shield, the calm at the centre, and he looked at me. A maid with shaking keys and no rank, and a wolf inexplicably planted at her side. And there was no contest. There was never going to be a contest. I had known that before I opened my mouth, and I had opened it anyway. "The household is secure," the king said. "To the room. Not to me. There will be no..." And his wolf, sitting at my hip, threw back its head and made a sound that was not agreement. That was the 7th time, and it was the last time I asked, because asking had taken me as far as asking goes. The wolf gave me one more chance at him before they did, and the wolf did not ask my permission. I was carrying linen along the upper gallery, keys when it came around the corner at a dead trot, took the hem of my sleeve in its teeth, and towed me linen and all through a door that should have been the king's private study, and was, because the king was in it. Magnus looked up from a map of his own border, with the expression of a man whose dignity has just been handed to a maid by a wolf. For a moment, neither of us. The wolf sat down between us, pleased with itself, and refused to move. "I did not send for you," he said. "No, my lord." He did. I gathered the linen against me, and did not curtsy, because my hands were full, and because I had run out of the part of me that curtsied. "I'll go." "Stay." It was not a kindness. It was a command, and it cost him to give it. I watched it cost the small war in his jaw, and I understood that the proud king had just discovered he did not want me to leave the room, and was furious about the discovery. So I told the truth, the way I do, because it was the only currency I had left, and I was done spending it carefully. "You think you cannot be surprised," I said. "That is the whole of you, my lord. Everyone in this fortress knows it. You have made certain they know it. The king who is never caught off guard. The man who sees it coming. It is your armour, and it is very good armour." I set the linen down on the edge of his map, which was an outrage, and I did not care. But a thing everyone knows about you is a thing your enemies know about you. Someone has looked at your armour and found the seam. They are not planning to get past a man who cannot be surprised. They are planning to use the fact that you cannot believe you might be. The fire moved in the grate. He had gone very still, the particular stillness of a man holding a door shut against something. "You are a maid," he said. You light lamps. I do. I light every lamp in this fortress, and I snuff every one, and I have been doing it in the dark behind your walls since before you knew my face, which means I have heard 6 years of things men say when they think only the furniture is listening. I met his eyes, which a maid does not do. I am the last person in your kingdom who would lie to you, my lord, because I am the only one who gains nothing by it. I have already lost. They have my warning, and they have laughed at it. The only thing I have left to give you is the truth. And you will not take it, and I cannot make you, and I find that my voice did the thing I had not given it permission to do. I stopped it. I find I cannot watch it. That is all. He stood. He came around the table, and the wolf let him, and he stopped a full pace from me, a careful man. A guarded distance. A king who held the space between us like something he did not trust himself to close. He looked down at me for a long moment. When I was 19, he said, slowly, as though the words were being drawn out of a place that had grown over. A man I trusted told me there was no danger on the Eastern Road. I believed him, because I was certain of him, the way you are certain of the people you love. My father took that road. He stopped. His hand had risen, halfway, as if to offer something, and then it fell, and did not. I have spent every year since making certain I would never again be the fool who did not see it coming. I built a man no one could surprise. Something terrible moved behind his face. And you have just told me that the man I built is the door they intend to walk through. Yes, I said. Quiet, I have. For one moment, I thought he would believe me. I saw it cross him, the willingness, the crack. I have replayed that moment more than any other, because if he had taken my hand then, in that room, it would all have gone differently and easier, and I would have a whole shoulder. He did not take my hand. He closed the door instead, not the real one, the one in his face, the one I did not have the key to. Pride is a fortress too, and his had stood 20 years, and a maid does not breach in an afternoon what grief built in a lifetime. The household is secure, he said again. To me, this time. Softer, which was worse. I picked up my linen. The wolf rose to follow me, and he did not call it back, and we left the King of the Iron Reach alone with his map, and his certainty, and the seam I had shown him, and he would not look at. That was the closest he came to seeing me, before the dark. A pace away, his hand half risen, the truth on the table beside his border. I want it remembered, because of what he became after, that he had the chance to be it sooner, in the light, and could not. The dark made him brave. I have decided to forgive the dark for that, since it gave me the rest of him. They took my keys the next morning. Roderick ordered it for my own protection, the order said, so that I would not wander where I should not, and frighten myself with shadows. A maid without keys is a maid without work, and a maid without work is a maid one short step from the gate. I understood the message. I had become inconvenient, and inconvenient things in a fortress get moved to the edge, and then out of it. I did not go quietly, but I went. There is a difference between a woman who accepts a thing and a woman who is biding. I was biding. I gave up the ring of iron that had sung at my hip for 6 years, and I felt naked without it, and I started, that very afternoon, to make myself a problem in the only way left to a maid stripped of her keys. I started watching Roderick. It is a strange power. Being no one, stripped of my keys, I was less than furniture. And less than furniture is invisible in a way even maids are not. I followed the master of the household through his ordinary day, 3 paces behind a serving cart that was not mine, and I learned the thing that should have been obvious from the first night. The thing that had been standing in the calm centre of every dismissal. He was there, every time. When Gunnar laughed at me, Roderick had been within earshot, examining a ledger. When the kitchen steward told me to mind my pots, Roderick had been in the doorway, waiting on the king's supper. Every single time a man had told me I was mistaken, the master of the household had been close enough to hear it land. Close enough to make sure it landed. He had not been investigating my warning. He had been conducting the disbelief, the way a man conducts a choir, standing where he could hear every voice and correct any that went off the note. If you have ever known a thing in your body before your mind could prove it, known it the way you know a stair is there in the dark, then you know how I felt. 3 paces behind that cart, with no keys, and no rank, and no one who would believe the maid who had been wrong about everything except the one thing that mattered. Stay with me. We are nearly to the dark part, and the dark part is where a maid finally gets to be the only one who can see. If a slow-burning story about being right when no one believes you is the kind of thing you stay up for, you might subscribe before the lights go out they are about to. Now, back to it. The wolf found me that night. I was in the disused West Tower where they had quartered me, keyless, useless, and it came up the stairs and put its great head in my lap and would not leave, and I understood that the king's wolf had decided to spend the night guarding a maid instead of the king, which meant the king was unguarded by the one creature in the fortress that could not be lied to. I should explain what I had finally pieced together, because I had pieced it together by then, sitting in a cold tower with a wolf's head in my lap. The name I had heard in the passage, the name I had carried to 6 men Vaughan, a loud rival lord who had been sniffing around the king's borders for a season. That name was a gift. Vaughan was the obvious one. Vaughan was meant to be heard. A maid who accused Lord Vaughan could be dismissed as a maid who had heard tavern gossip and gotten above herself. Roderick had let me run at Vaughan like a hound at a dragged scent. Because every hour I spent being wrong about Vaughan was an hour no one spent being right about Roderick. The plot was not Vaughan's. The plot belonged to the calm man at the king's right hand, the only man with keys to every door, including the ones I had been forbidden, and the feast was tonight. I did not have my keys, but I had carried them for 6 years, and I will tell you a secret about keys. The woman who holds them stops needing them. I knew which doors stuck. I knew which servants' passages ran behind which walls. I knew the fortress in the dark, the way Roderick knew it in the light. And I knew one thing he had forgotten. Because powerful men forget the people who clean up after them, I knew that every torch and lamp and candle in the great hall was lit and snuffed by maids, on a signal from the passages behind the walls. Which meant if you wanted the hall dark at a chosen moment, you did not need sorcery. You needed the maids. You needed someone who could give the maids the signal. You needed the master of the household. I went down through the walls. The feast was loud above me, the whole pack at the long tables, the king at the head with Roderick at his right and Gunnar at his shoulder, and not one of them looking for a maid in the dark behind the stone. I moved through the servants' passages I had cleaned 10,000 times, and I found the lamp boy at his post by the signal cord, a child of 9 who knew me, and I crouched in the dark and I asked him, quiet, who had told him tonight's signal. The master himself, the boy said. Strange, he said. The master never comes down here. I told the boy to run. I told him to find Gunnar and say the words wolf and dark and Tilda was right, and to keep saying them until someone's hand closed on a sword. He was a good boy. He ran. And then, above me, the signal came not from the boy's cord which I was holding, but from a second cord I had not known about, because Roderick had set his own, because of course he had. The man left nothing to a maid he could do himself. The lights went out. I have tried many times to describe what a great hall sounds like when the light dies and 300 wolves cannot see. It is not screaming, not at first. It is a held breath, 300 strong, and then the scrape of benches, and then the first blade, and under all of it a single voice Roderick's, Calm, even now. Calm, always saying the king's name like an apology. I came up out of the wall into the black, behind the wolf throne, and I did the only thing 6 years and no keys had left me able to do. I found the king in the dark. I found him by the cold spot in the hall that was him. By the place the air went still the way it does around a man who has just understood that his oldest friend is moving toward him with a knife. I got my hand around his wrist. I will not tell you I was brave. I was past brave. I was only sure, and I pulled. Hard, a maid hauling a king sideways off his own throne. And the blade that had been meant for his heart went into my shoulder instead. I felt it the way you feel cold water, all wrongness and no pain yet, and then all pain. I did not let go of his wrist. I had hauled heavier things through these passages. I hauled him. Door, I said, into the dark, into his ear, the only word that mattered. Behind the throne. Trust the maid or die, my king, choose now. He chose. I have thought about that, since that a man whose entire life was built on never being unguarded, never being led, never trusting a thing he had not verified twice, chose in the black to be led by the hand by a bleeding maid he had dismissed in front of his whole court. He chose me in the one moment he could not see me, which is the only moment that has ever counted to me. I took him through the wall. I knew every turn. He did not. I bled down the back of my own arm and counted the passages by the feel of the stone and got us to the lower stair, and behind us I heard Roderick's men finding the empty throne and the smear of my blood and not understanding. Because they were warriors, and they were thinking like warriors, and the one thing a warrior cannot track is a maid who has walked away through a wall that isn't supposed to be a door. We came out into torchlight in the lower yard, into Gunnar and a dozen swords, and the lamp boy white as milk. And Gunnar took one look at the king alive, and the maid bleeding, and his face did a thing I will carry to my grave. Because it was the face of a man understanding, all at once, every single time he had laughed. The king held me up. I was past holding myself up by then, and he turned to Gunnar with his arm around a maid, and her blood on his royal hand, and his voice not calm at all, for once in his armoured life not calm. "The hall," he said. "Roderick, now, and someone get this woman a healer before I lose the only person in my kingdom who saw." It was not clean after that, the way these things are never clean. They took Roderick in the dark hall, and he did not fight, because his weapon had never been a sword, it had been everyone's trust, and that was spent. By the law of the pack, he could have demanded a challenge. He did not. He demanded, instead, to speak, and the king let him, which I did not understand until I heard what he said. "You never listened to her," Roderick told the hall, almost gentle, the last cruelty of a cruel and gentle man. "Not one of you. I only had to stand beside you while you didn't." He looked at the king then, his oldest friend, and there was something in it that was almost grief. "You taught them all that you could not be surprised. I just used the lesson. That was the thing that broke the king's face. Finally, not the knife. Not the betrayal. That, the master of the household had built the whole murder out of the king's own pride, brick by brick, and called it a lesson, and he was right, and everyone heard him be right. Magnus stripped him of name and household, and put him past the eastern border, which is the law's coldest mercy. Vaughan, who had been nothing but a dragged scent the whole time, was sent home with apologies he did not deserve, and will dine on for years. The fortress did not heal quickly. A household that has learned its own trust was a weapon does not simply pick up its baskets and carry on. There were quiet weeks. There were a great many maids who suddenly found that men turned, now, at the sound of keys. My shoulder healed slowly and badly, and aches when the rain comes, and I have decided to keep the ache, the way I keep everything, as a record. Here is the part I said I would tell you. The first time the king truly looked at me. It was 3 days after, in the healer's quarters, where I had been told to stay and had mostly ignored the telling. He came alone, which a king does not do, and he stood in the doorway. He is a tall man, and the door was small, and the wolf was already inside, asleep across my feet like it owned them, which it did, and he looked at me as though he had never seen me before in his life. Because he had not. He had seen a maid making a scene. He had seen furniture that walked. Now he saw the woman who had hauled him through a wall in the dark with a knife in her shoulder, because she was sure. And he did not have a single word ready, the famously controlled king of the Iron Reach. Not one. And I watched him not have it. "You told them 7 times, he said at last. 8, counting you. I am aware of which one I was." His jaw moved. "I dismissed you in front of my court. I let him take your keys. I would be dead, and so would half that hall, if you had been the woman I treated you as." He stopped, started again, and this is the only soft thing I will give you, because it is the only one that matters. My wolf knew you for a month. He brought you my glove, my seal, my own hand if he could have managed it, and I told myself it was an animal making an animal's mistake. Because the alternative was that the unguarded thing in me had already chosen, and I had not been asked. He looked at the wolf, asleep on my feet. "I am the most well-defended man alive, and I have been outmaneuvered by my own heart and a scullery maid, and I find I do not mind losing for the first time in my life." I told him he was not as armoured as he thought he was. He said he was beginning to understand that, and then he closed the small distance there was to close, and he kissed me once, careful of the shoulder, and I understood in that single moment that being seen, truly seen, by someone who had every reason not to bother is a thing worth getting stabbed for, though I would recommend against the stabbing if there is any other way. There usually is, there just wasn't for me. 6 months on now, and the rain still finds my shoulder, and I still hear keys differently than other people do. I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which is a sentence I write down sometimes just to look at it. The court has stopped flinching when the wolf follows me, because the wolf follows me everywhere, and the court has more sense now than to argue with what the wolf decided before any of them could see it. Gunnar guards the king's door himself, and turns, every time, at the sound of me coming, and once called me Luna to a junior warrior in a tone that dared the boy to laugh. The boy did not laugh. No one laughs anymore. It is not fear. It is that they finally heard the keys. Magnus is a proud man. Still, you do not unbuild a fortress in a season, but he is a proud man who now asks the maids what they have heard, which has saved his border twice already. Because maids hear everything, and always have, and the only thing that ever changed is that someone finally turned around. He gave me a key. Last month, on a plain morning, with no ceremony, the way the realest things are given. Not a ring of them won. Iron, old, worn smooth. The key to the one room in the fortress that no maid has ever held the key to. The room behind the wolf throne. The dark passage I hauled him through, sealed now, kept, ours. He put it in my healed and aching hand and folded my fingers over it and did not explain. Because he did not need to. I know what a key means better than anyone alive. It means someone, finally, has opened the door. So tell me, did you believe her? Did you believe me? When no one in that hall would, or did you wait for the lights to go out like the rest of them? Come down to the comments and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read them all now. Every one, because I spent 6 years being no one, and I have developed strong opinions about being heard. If a story about a woman who was right all along is the kind you stay for, subscribe and stay close. There is always another door here, and always someone who knows where the dark passages run. Until the next one. Mind the lamps. There is a particular silence a great hall makes when it is deciding whether to destroy you, and I was standing in the center of it with a child's hand locked in mine and the broken bond burning a hole through my chest like a coal. The boy would not let go. That was the thing I could not get past. Even then, even with 100 wolves staring and a woman's voice ringing off the rafters calling me a liar and worse. He was 4 years old, and he had decided I was his, and he held on while the floor of my whole life dropped away. "Say it again," the woman said, sweet as poison. "Tell them all what you are." I could feel the king's eyes on me from the dais. I did not look at him. If I looked at him, I would lose the thread, and I had exactly one chance to say the true thing in the right order, and the bond pain was making the torches swim. I lifted my chin. I opened my mouth. It started a season before that. On the night, my own mate stood up, in front of everyone I had ever known, and threw me away like a cracked cup. I am Maren, I set bones, and I bring down fevers, and I have sat with more of this pack's dying than anyone living, and for 23 years that had been enough to make me invisible. Which is what I wanted. Healers are useful the way a doorframe is useful. No one thanks the doorframe. No one looks at it twice. I had built a quiet life out of being looked past, and I had told myself, the way you tell yourself things at the bottom of winter, that quiet and safe were the same word. His name was Garrick. My mate, fated, bonded, the wolf in me having decided the matter 2 years before my good sense was consulted. He was a ranked warrior with a strong jaw and a stronger sense of his own future, and from the first he had treated the bond between us like a debt someone else had run up in his name. I knew he was ashamed of me. A healer's apprentice with herb-stained hands is not the mate an ambitious wolf dreams of. I had made my peace with the cold of him, the way I made peace with most cold. I kept the fire low, and I did not ask for more. I should have asked for more. I know that now. But this is the story as it happened, and on the night it happened, I still thought smallness was a kind of armour. It was the autumn gathering at Greymark, the great stone hall of the Iron Territories, where the whole pack came in under one roof before the snows. Long fires, roasting meat, the high table on its dais, and on the dais the empty chair. You should know about the chair, because it matters later. At the king's right hand sat a chair no one used. Carved, beautiful, draped in grey. The Luna's seat. Our king's mate had died 4 winters past, in fever, and he had never filled the chair and never let it be moved. And the whole pack had learned not to look at it the way you learn not to look at a scar on a proud man's face. I had set healing draughts in that hall 12 times, and I had never once seen the king sit beside that chair without his hand resting a moment on its arm, as if checking it was still there. I was carrying a fever tincture to the steward's wife when Garrick stood up. He had drunk enough to be loud and not enough to be forgiven for it. He climbed onto the bench so the whole hall could see him, and he said my name, not kindly, the way you say a name when you have decided to make it into a joke, and the hall turned. "Maren," he said again, savouring it. "My mate. The pack healer." He smiled around at them all. "I reject the bond, here, in front of all of you, so there's no mistaking it. I'll not be chained to a still-room drudge with dirt under her nails and nothing to her name." He spread his arms to the laughter he was sure was coming. "Go on, then. Go home and cry to your herbs. Who'd take you now? Where would you even go?" The bond severed in that moment the way a green branch breaks. Not clean. All splinters. A white tearing pain that drove the air out of me where I stood. The law is true, by the way. I had set the bones of the rejected before, and never understood until that night that the pain is real, physical, a wound with no edge to bind. I gripped the back of a chair so I would not go down. Some of them did laugh, Garrick basked in it. He was already turning to a girl 2 ranks above me. Already done with me. Certain, and this is the part I want you to hold on to, certain that I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and that this was therefore safe. I did not cry to my herbs. I did not say one word. I set the steward's wife's tincture down on the table, very carefully, because my hands were shaking and I did not want to drop it. And then I straightened my back and I walked the entire length of that hall in the ringing quiet, past every face I had ever healed, and I went out through the great doors into the cold. I did not look at the dice. So I did not see, until much later, that the king had been standing at the very back of his own hall the whole time, in the shadow past the last fire, watching every second of it. I learned what he had decided at dawn, because at dawn his second-in-command came to my door. Osric was a broad, careful man with grey at his temples, who had never in my life had cause to speak to me. He filled my doorway the way a closed gate does. Behind him stood 2 warriors, and behind them the sky was going pink over the pines, and my first cold thought was that Garrick's family had decided a rejected mate was an embarrassment best sent away quietly. "The king wants you," Osric said. Then, because something in my face must have moved, he added, gruff, "Not like that. Bring nothing you can't carry." I want to be honest about what I felt walking up to that hall in the grey light, because it was not hope. I had spent a whole night with a hole torn in my chest, and I had no more illusions about what powerful wolves wanted from a healer with stained hands. I went because a king's summons is not a thing you decline, and I went deciding that whatever he offered or demanded, I would meet it on my own feet. He was alone in the hall when I came in. No court, just the king and the long cold fires burned down to embers and the empty grey chair beside him. He looked older up close than he did from across a room. The king, Torvald, though no one below the high ranks said the name to his face, was tall and dark-bearded and tired in a way that had set into the bone. He looked at me for a long moment, and I made myself look back. And I waited. "Last night," he said, "a wolf of mine threw away his mate in my hall, in front of my pack, and laughed about it." His voice was low and even. "I do not allow my people to be unmade for sport. It reflects on me. It tells every pack watching that the Iron Territories let the strong humiliate the weak for the pleasure of a haul." His jaw tightened. "I will not have it said of me." "So this is about your name," I said. It came out steadier than I felt. "Not mine." Something flickered behind his eyes. He did not deny it. "I am offering you 2 things," he said, "and you will choose. There is a horse saddled in the yard, and gold enough to start again wherever you like, the southern packs, the free towns, anywhere beyond the reach of what was done to you here. Take it, and go with my protection on the road, and no one will follow. That is the first thing." He paused, and his hand found the arm of the grey chair the way it always did, without his seeming to know it did. "Or you stay, under my claim. Not as a wife, as a woman of this hall under the king's word, untouchable, beyond Garrick, beyond his family, beyond any wolf who thinks a rejected mate is fair game. You would owe me nothing. But you would be mine to protect, and they would all know it by midday." I stood there in the cold hall and understood that he was handing me a still-room drudge, with dirt under her nails, an actual choice, the first real one anyone had offered me in years. "Why," I said, "would a king spend his claim on a healer he has never spoken to?" "Because it is the right thing," he said, "and I am short of those lately," and he would say no more. I should have taken the horse. Any sensible woman with a hole torn in her chest takes the horse and the gold and the open road and never looks back. I have asked myself 100 times why I didn't, and the truest answer I have is the one I'm least proud of. I was done being sent away. Garrick had sent me away with a laugh. I would not also send myself. I'll stay, I said. He nodded once, like a man closing a ledger. He did not smile. He stood, and he spoke a formal word over me that made the air prickle. A king's claim of protection. Old as the pack. A thing that cannot be taken back lightly. And he was careful, I noticed, to keep 2 full paces between us the whole time, as if the claim were a document he was signing, and not a thing that touched either of us at all. That should have been the end of my part in his life. A claim. A word. A healer kept safe in a wing of the hall, the king going back to his grief and his empty chair, and forgetting I existed. Then his son found me. I did not even know the king had a son. The boy was 4, dark-haired like his father, and he had been motherless since the fever winter, raised by nurses in the high rooms and brought down to the hall only on feast days like a small solemn ornament. His name was Leaf. I was in the still room they had given me, 3 days into my strange new safety, grinding willow bark out of pure habit because idle hands frighten me, when a small person walked in without knocking and stood watching me work with the unblinking gravity only very small children and very old men possess. "You're the one my father kept," he said. "I suppose I am." He considered this. Then he climbed onto the bench beside me, uninvited, and watched my hands, and after a while he reached out and very seriously moved the bowl an inch to the left, as though it had been bothering him from across the room, and I let him. And that was that. He came back the next day. And the next. No one had told him healers were invisible. No one had told him I was a charity case the king had taken on to save his own reputation. He just decided I was interesting, and then he decided I was his, the way children do, all at once and without appeal. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself a great many things that season that turned out to be wrong. If you've come this far with me, stay, because what that little boy did in front of the whole pack a month later, and what I found out about why the king really kept me, turned everything I've told you so far inside out. I thought I was a debt a proud king paid to protect his own name. I was about to learn I was something he had been quietly looking for 4 years, without ever knowing my name. Follow moon and iron so the thread doesn't break. The empty chair, the boy, and the night I finally understood why a grieving king spent his claim on a stranger. Now let me tell you about the woman who had been watching all of it. Her name was Lady Astrid, and she had come to Greymark to be Luna. I should have seen her sooner. She was highborn, from a strong pack to the east, beautiful and clever and patient, and she had spent 2 years making herself indispensable to the king's court, managing his feasts, charming his advisors, sitting near the high table at every gathering, with the serene confidence of a woman who has decided that the empty grey chair is, eventually, hers. She had been kind to me. At first. That should have warned me. Powerful people are rarely kind to door frames without a reason. "You poor thing," she said to me once, in a corridor, her voice all warmth and her eyes all winter. Taken in out of pity, and now the child won't leave you alone. People are starting to talk, you know. They say you've worked your way into the king's grief through his son. They say a clever stillroom girl knows exactly what she's doing. She touched my arm. I'd be careful. Pity curdles so quickly into suspicion. It would be a shame if you had to leave us after all. I went back to my stillroom, and I sat down and I thought, with the small cold clarity that has carried me through most of my life, she is going to hurt me. And she is cleverer than Garrick. And she is not finished. The thing about being a healer is that people talk in front of you the way they talk in front of furniture. That is how I started to put it together. A word here, a closed door there, a serving girl's idle gossip about Lady Astrid's generosity to a certain ambitious warrior. It took me 3 weeks to find the shape of it, and when I found it, I sat very still for a long time. Garrick had not thrown me away on a drunken whim. He had been paid to. Lady Astrid had gone to him quietly and offered him what he wanted most, a match 2 ranks above me, her patronage, a future, in exchange for one thing, that he break with me publicly, humiliatingly, completely, at the autumn gathering where the king would see. She had not done it to free Garrick. She had done it to remove me. Because Lady Astrid, who missed nothing, had seen what I had not, and what the king himself did not yet know. She had watched the king's eyes find the pack healer across his hall, more than once, over more than one winter, and linger a half-beat too long, and she had decided to destroy the rival before the king ever realised he had one. The humiliation was never about Garrick's pride. It was a blade aimed at me, thrown by a woman who understood the king's heart better than the king did. And I understood, sitting there in the cold, that walking out of that hall with my chin up had not ended it. It had started it. Something in me changed that night. And it did not change back. I had spent 23 years being looked past and calling it peace. I was done. Garrick had laughed and asked where I would even go, and Lady Astrid had stroked my arm and told me to be careful, and they had both made the same mistake, which was to be certain I would fold. I sat there in my still room, and I felt the last of the soft, frightened thing in me go hard and clear as ice on stone, and I said, to the empty room, in a voice I had not used before, "No, not this time. Let her come." I stopped flinching in corridors. I stopped lowering my eyes. And the next time Lady Astrid came to curdle pity into suspicion, she found a different woman waiting. And I watched her notice it, and I watched it trouble her. I learnt the king's secret by accident, which is the only way I ever learn anything that matters. Little Leaf had a fever, a real one, sharp and sudden, the kind that had taken his mother, and the whole high household lost its head. And they sent for me, because by then there was no one the boy would let near him but me. I sat with him 2 nights running, cooling him, coaxing willow bark and honey into him, singing the flat, tuneless songs that are all I have. And on the 2nd night, the king came and sat across the small bed from me and watched his son breathe, and somewhere in the grey hour before dawn, half to himself, he began to talk. "The last time I sat up like this," he said, "it was her. My Luna, the fever took her in 3 days, and there was nothing any healer could do. And I sat where you're sitting, and I held her hand, and I was useless." His thumb moved over the back of his son's small wrist. There was one healer who would not leave. The others gave up. They could see it was hopeless, and they had other sick to tend, and they were right to go. But there was a young one, an apprentice, who stayed the whole last night. She did not pretend she could save her. She just stayed, so my Luna would not go into the dark with no hand but mine to hold. He shook his head slowly. I never learned her name. The hall was chaos, and then it was grief, and by the time I thought to ask, no one could tell me which apprentice it had been. I have wondered about her for 4 years. The one kind thing in the worst night of my life, and I could not even thank her. I sat very still. Because I remembered that night. Of course I remembered that night. I had been 16, terrified, certain I would be punished for failing, and I had stayed because I could not make my feet carry me out of the room of a dying woman whose hand had gone cold by degrees in mine. I had never told a soul. I had not thought the king, drowning in his grief, had even known I was there. "It was me," I said. He looked up, and I watched the king of the Iron Territories understand, 4 years late, who he had claimed at dawn. Not a stranger he had pitied for the sake of his own name, but the one person who had been kind to him in the dark when kindness could not even help. He had not known it when he claimed me. He had only known there was something about the healer his pack had thrown away that he could not walk past. His wolf had known the rest, the way wolves do, and had been quietly steering him toward me for a season, while his grief told him he felt nothing at all. That is why he keeps, the king said. Very low, the boy. The wolf. Me, he stopped. His hand had gone still on his son's wrist. I told myself it was honor. I am a poor liar to myself, it turns out. He did not reach for me. He kept his careful 2 paces even then, with the fevered child between us and the truth finally in the open. But he looked at me across that small bed, as if I were the first warm thing he had let himself see in 4 winters, and I felt the held space between us like a weight neither of us was willing to set down. And the boy's fever broke just before dawn, and none of us said anything more. We did not need to. Some doors, once they are open, do not have to be walked through that same night. Lady Astrid made her move at the next full gathering, and she made it the way clever people do, by turning my strength into the weapon against me. The hall was full. The king on the dais, the grey chair beside him, the whole pack in under the rafters. And Lady Astrid rose, gracious and grave, and addressed the king with the practised sorrow of a woman who only wants what is best. My king, I speak because no one else will, out of love for this pack. She turned, so the whole hall was her audience. A rejected healer is taken in out of mercy, and within a season she has the king's heir, clinging to her skirts, the king sitting up nights at her side, the whole court whispering. We have all seen it. How does a still-room girl, thrown away by her own mate, climb so fast into a grieving king's household? She let the question hang, ugly and shapeless, the kind that cannot be answered because it was never meant to be. I say she has preyed on your grief and your son's loneliness. I say she is not a victim. I say she is the most dangerous kind of climber, the patient kind, and I say the pack deserves to know what she truly is before she sits in a chair she has no right to. It was beautifully done. I will give her that to the end of my days. She had taken every true thing. The boy who loved me, the nights at the fever bed, the king who could not walk past me, and bent them all into proof of a crime. The hall began to murmur, and the murmur had teeth, and I felt it turn toward me the way a cold wind turns. And the king began to rise, his face going dangerous, ready to bring the whole weight of his word down to shield me. I put my hand on the table, and I stood first. No, I said, to him, quietly, just for him, not this time. Let me, because I had spent my whole life being spoken for, sent away, decided about by other people in rooms I was not even standing in. And I understood, with the torches swimming and the broken bond aching in my chest the way it still did when I was frightened, that if the king rescued me here, I would be exactly what Astrid said I was, a woman who climbed on the strength of his protection. The only way to answer her was to need no protection at all. So I stood in the centre of that hall in the ringing quiet, and the boy slipped down off the dice and crossed the whole floor before anyone could stop him, and put his hand in mine and held on, 4 years old and certain, in front of all of them, and I felt the bond pain flare white, and I held it, and I held him, and I lifted my chin. Lady Astrid asks how a thrown-away healer climbed so fast. My voice came out clear. I'll tell the hall exactly how. The same night Garrick rejected me for sport, he came into a sum he had no way to earn, a patron, a match 2 ranks above him, a future bought and paid for. I did not look at Garrick, gone grey at his bench. Ask him who paid him. Ask him whose generosity bought my humiliation, and why a great lady would spend so much gold to remove one still-room healer from a hall. Now I looked at her. You did not destroy me, because I was nothing, my lady. You destroyed me because you were the only one in this hall who saw what the king had not yet admitted to himself. You aimed at me a year before he ever knew I was there. That is not the carefulness of a woman protecting her pack. That is the carefulness of a woman who has already lost, and knows it. The silence after that was a different silence. I have set bones to the sound of a hall that quiet. Garrick broke first. Garrick, who had never been able to hold a thing in his life, stammering, half confessing, naming her in his panic. And it was over. You could see it cross the hall like light. Lady Astrid stood very straight and very alone while the pack's faces turned, one by one, from me to her, and the king came down off the dais at last, not to rescue me, but to stand beside me, his shoulder a pace from mine, and let the whole pack see where he chose to stand. Lady Astrid of the Eastern Pack, he said, and his voice filled the hall to the rafters, you bought the humiliation of one of my people, and called it love of this pack. You are stripped of your place at this court, and put to the Eastern Road by midday. And if your pack would quarrel with that, they may bring the quarrel to me. He let that sit, and let every wolf here mark it, the next one who throws away the weak for sport answers to me personally. Marin is under my word. She always was. It was the boy who undid me, though, in the middle of all of it, into the great quiet. Leaf tugged my hand and said, not quietly, children are never quiet. Does this mean you stay forever now? And I knelt down to his level, with the whole pack watching and the king watching, and my eyes stinging in a way I would later blame on the torch smoke. And I said, yes, I think it does. The kiss came later, and it was not a thing of mouths or heat. It came weeks after. In the doorway of the nursery he always left open, when the boy was finally asleep, and the king crossed the 2 careful paces he had held between us for a whole season, and rested his brow against mine, and let me feel, all at once, the warmth he had buried so deep that even his grief had not been able to reach it. Something I had been holding shut for 23 guarded years came quietly open. He did not say much. Grieving men rarely do. But he said, his wolf knew you before I would let myself. I am only catching up. And that was enough. That was everything. The fallout was not tidy. Garrick was put to the road behind his patron, disgraced, his bought future gone to ash, and good riddance. Astrid's pack to the east grumbled, and there were tense envoys through the winter, and the king rode out twice to make the border hold, and I did not sleep well the nights he was gone. The court that had whispered against me had to unlearn the whispering, and some did it gracelessly. A Luna who comes up from the stillroom learns fast which bows are real, but I had walked the length of that hall once with a hole torn in my chest and my chin up, and after a woman has done that, the small weather of a few proud wolves cannot move her much. 6 months later, the snows came back, and the king had a new chair made. I want to be careful telling you this part, because it is the part I hold closest. He did not give me the grey chair. The grey chair was hers, his first Luna's, the woman whose cold hand I had held when I was 16. And some seats are not meant to be filled by anyone else, and we both knew it. So instead, the grey chair stayed where it had always stood, draped and honoured, and beside it, on the king's other hand, there was now a new chair, plain and good and made of pale pine, and that one was mine. I sat in it the first night with Leaf half asleep against my side, and the most feared wolf in the north reaching over. Without seeming to notice he did it, to rest his hand a moment on the arm of the grey chair the way he always had, and then, after, to rest it over mine. A letter came that morning from the southern village where I was born, from a woman who had known me when I was nobody's anything, wanting to know if the wild story was true, that the healer Garrick threw away in the autumn was Luna of the Iron Territories now, with a king and a boy and a chair of her own at the high table. I read it twice, in the pale morning light, with a grieving man who had stopped grieving asleep in the chair beside me, and his son's hand fisted in my sleeve. And I thought about the night I walked out of that hall, certain I had nowhere to go, and no one to turn to. I had been so sure that was the end of me. It turned out to be the first time in my life I had ever walked towards something instead of away. So tell me, that night at the back of the hall, when the king watched my own mate throw me away and said nothing, and let me walk out into the cold alone, do you think he already knew, somewhere under all that grief, who I was? Or did his wolf recognize me a full season before his heart would let him? I've sat in my pale pine chair and turned it over all winter, and I still can't say for certain. Tell me your theory below. I read every one. And if you want to know what came down the eastern road when the snows melted, and what a 4-year-old boy did when Astrid's pack came asking after her, comment the chair and stay close. Follow Moon and Iron. Share this with someone who needs reminding that walking out with your chin up is not the same as having nowhere to go, and I'll tell you what happened the next time someone underestimated the healer they threw away. Her side of the story. Pull up a chair. There's room now.